So our top story coming from the United States backyard.
Right, absolutely. Is the United States staring at a neighborhood crisis? That is the big question here. And that's because on Thursday, Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi met with Cuban counterpart Miguel Diaz-Canel. Raisi's visit, it comes as Cuba also moves to bolster ties with distant but critical allies like Russia and China.
Yes, that's the important question that the world is asking. Raisi said that Cuba and Iran would seek opportunities to work together in electricity generation, biotechnology and mining, among other areas. Officials signed agreements vowing to boost cooperation between the countries' ministries of justice and customs agencies, as well as in telecommunications.
از کارهایی که حتما در کمیسیون مشترک اقتصادی باید مورد توجه قرار بگیره در بخش نیروگاهی و توانایی‌هایی که جمهوری اسلامی داره، این هم حوزه‌ای است که بین ما و کوبا میتونه یه حوزه فعالی بشه و فعالیت داشته باشیم. حوزه معادن از حوزه‌هایی است که میتونه در واقع محور همکاری‌های ما با کشور کوبا باشه. من امیدوارم این نشست در جهت همفکری و هماندیشی و همگرایی بین ایران و کوبا نشست موثری باشه. من به دلیلی که
Now, Cuban President Miguel Diaz-Canel hit out at the United States. He said Venezuela, Nicaragua, Cuba and Iran have had to heroically confront sanctions, threats, blockades and interference by Yankee imperialism and its allies.
Last year, Miguel Diaz-Canel met with the presidents of Russia and China. The talks with Putin and Xi helped strengthen ties. Deals were signed to ease the country's debt burden and secure aid following the devastating impacts of Hurricane Ian. Communist-run Cuba has been under a wide-reaching U.S. trade embargo since shortly after Fidel Castro's 1959 revolution. Those restrictions were reinforced by former U.S. President Donald Trump. The curbs have contributed to a nearly unprecedented economic crisis that has led to a shortage of food, fuel and medicine.
On Wednesday, the Russian president met the Cuban prime minister in the Kremlin. Putin said, I'm quoting here, Russia has always had a special attitude towards the island of freedom.
Мы знаем, что незаконные санкции, в которых живет Куба, продолжаются десятилетиями. Тем не менее, кубинский народ справляется с этим. Мы со своей стороны будем делать все для того, чтобы наше экономическое взаимодействие помогало преодолевать эти привнесенные извне сложности.
Last week, the White House accused China of operating an intelligence unit in Cuba for years. White House added that China upgraded the intelligence unit in 2019 in an effort to enhance its presence on the Caribbean island. A base in Cuba would be viewed in Washington as a direct challenge to the United States of America. Remember, Cuba lies around 150 kilometers off Florida's southern tip. China refuted Washington's claims and dubbed them as false information. Cuba dismissed the claims too and stressed that it rejects all foreign military presence in Latin America, including the bases maintained in the region by the United States.
So the question here is the United States staring at a neighborhood crisis? Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi met with Cuban counterpart, and this visit comes as Cuba moves to bolster ties with critical allies like Russia and China. As per Raisi, Cuba and Iran would seek opportunities to work together in electricity generation, biotechnology, mining, among other areas. Officials also signed agreements vowing to boost cooperation between the countries. Now, for more on this, we're joined by Colin Strong from Kuala Lumpur. He's a foreign affairs and security strategist from the University of Malaya. Thank you so much for joining us, sir.
Thank you. Good morning.
Now, to begin with, sir, I just want to begin by understanding how do you assess this supposed warming of ties between Iran, Cuba, China and Russia. What does this mean for the United States?
The continuation of efforts to lure Washington to a trap by Beijing. Of course, we have seen how Beijing is trying to send a message that it has its own version of friendshoring, that it has its own platform of allies and partners that it can utilize on. Of course, we have seen how the warming of ties between Beijing and Moscow, as well as Beijing, Riyadh, as well as Tehran, and we have seen this pattern of this strategic maneuver by Beijing in luring Washington into this trap of making mistakes and miscalculations, and using that as a pretext to justify further maneuvers and further power projections that will be further limiting Washington's approach, as well as capitalizing on this perceived decline in terms of Western momentum as part of the Chinese containment efforts. So we've seen this pattern ranging from spy balloon, from this spy base in Cuba, which has been going on for years now, and this is all part of this continuation of series of efforts by Beijing in terms of strengthening its allies and to ensure that its maneuvers in the region are not being confined to South China Sea and Taiwan Strait alone. And this is a strong message to Washington that this is one of the most dangerous period in history, and that Beijing has the upper hand now, to force Washington into this game of dictating the terms of these consultations and dialogues with Blinken, for example, on Beijing's term. And this is where I think Beijing has the upper hand now, and Washington needs to be more strategic and urgent in terms of dealing with Beijing in terms of these power projections in the region, as well as in the zones nearer to the continental US itself.
Mr. Chong, you spoke about Beijing having an upper hand and dictating terms now in this global order, as it were. Now, Antony Blinken is headed to Beijing this weekend. What do you think is going to happen in that meeting? How heavily will these ties, particularly with Cuba, and we saw how China brokered ties between Iran and Saudi Arabia. So how heavily is this issue going to weigh on those bilateral meetings that Antony Blinken will have in Beijing?
I will argue that the main point of contention will still be on the red line that has been set by Beijing, which should be, of course, on Taiwan. Taiwan issue has been the paramount issue between both players, and that as I've argued, Beijing's quest is to ensure that, as we have seen the recent examples of an unwillingness on Beijing's part to have these deeper military connections with Washington, as we've seen from the Shangri-La dialogue and also from the tense phone call with Blinken recently, and it's all theory being argued by as nearing its peak power projections, and that Washington is perceived to be at the weakest point in this history. So this is the period where both are sizing up each other and seeing who will take the first punch, and that who will make the most mistakes. So can see how the maneuvers by Beijing recently in the sky, in the seas, from these coercive tactics, intimidation, as well as bellicose actions, and is bold enough to challenge U.S. dominance in that area. Of course, area denial capacity also in South China Sea and Taiwan Strait. So, but the looming issue that will be of the main point of contention will still be on the red line being set by Beijing on Taiwan, and trying to normalize the of course, as we have seen how daily harassment in Taiwan Strait and settlement of Taiwan. And all that. So this will be the point of contention, and I'm sure that Beijing will use it to its own advantage, maximizing its own leverage and bargaining chip, and also to send a message to other partners saying that, look, Washington is desperate enough to come over to China and to ensure that there's this responsible way of managing ties, and that this is a message to both the Western and also non-Western players, also galvanizing support in Global South, from BRICS to G20 itself also, for example, and Global South and existing players and partners in the Middle East, in Latin America, and Africa, to send a message that Beijing now has the momentum, and that this is all also as a continuation of making America look even weaker since the departure from Afghanistan, and that is considered as the main point, starting point of the decline of the West and of course the decline of the US in terms of foreign policy, in terms of the urge or capacity and efficacy in containing China. So this is a brilliant play by Beijing, and Washington needs to ramp up its own strategic maneuvers in ensuring that it has the momentum in terms of the Western support and a greater and comprehensive, more holistic structure of the containment efforts to contain China's maneuvers in the region.
All right, Mr. Chong, thanks very much for joining us with your perspective on this story.
Thank you. Thank you very much.